Number 1. Brenda Spencer, whose hatred for Mondays turned into one of the most shocking school shootings in American history. Brenda Ann Spencer was born on April 3, 1962, in San Diego, California, into a household marked by dysfunction and emotional neglect. Her parents divorced when she was young, and she was primarily raised by her father, Wallace Spencer, in the working-class neighborhood of San Carlos. From an early age, Brenda exhibited signs of severe depression and social isolation. She was frequently truant from school, had few friends, and spent most of her time alone in her bedroom, which she had turned into something of a fortress. Her father, apparently attempting to connect with her in some way, gave her a Ruger 10 of 22 semi-automatic rifle and ammunition for Christmas in 1978, despite her known mental health struggles and history of violent outbursts. This decision would prove catastrophic. By January 1979, Brenda was 16 years old and attending Patrick Henry High School, though her attendance was sporadic at best. She had expressed suicidal ideation to a mental health screening clinic months earlier, and a police officer who had been assigned to escort her to the facility later recalled that she had mentioned wanting to do something big to get on television. These warning signs went largely unheeded. On the morning of Monday, January 29, 1979, Brenda opened her bedroom window, which overlooked Cleveland Elementary School directly across the street. At approximately 8:30 a.m., as children were arriving for classes, she began firing. Her first victim was Principal Burton Ragg, who was rushing outside to protect children after hearing the initial shots. He was struck in the shoulder and chest and died at the scene. Custodian Mike Sucher was killed moments later while attempting to pull children to safety. 8 children were wounded, ranging in age from 6 to 12, with injuries including spinal damage and permanent paralysis for some. The shooting continued for approximately 20 minutes before police surrounded the house. During the standoff, a reporter from the San Diego Evening Tribune somehow obtained the telephone number at the Spencer residence and called directly. Brenda answered, and when asked why she was doing this, she replied with the now infamous line, "I don't like Mondays. This livens up the day." She also mentioned that shooting people was a lot of fun, and that she enjoyed watching them try to escape. These statements would become central to public perception of the crime and were later referenced in the Boomtown Rats song, "I Don't Like Mondays." Brenda eventually surrendered to police without further violence. During interrogation, she claimed that she had been under the influence of alcohol and hallucinogenic drugs, though blood tests revealed only traces of a minor tranquilizer. Her trial began in July 1980, with her defense attorneys arguing that her father's gift of the rifle constituted reckless endangerment and that she had been failed by multiple systems, including mental health services and law enforcement who had been aware of her threats. Prosecutors presented evidence of her calculated preparations, including her positioning at the window, her ammunition supply, and her statements during the attack suggesting clear awareness of her actions. The jury rejected her insanity defense, and on September 19, 1980, Brenda Spencer was convicted of 2 counts of murder and 9 counts of assault. She was sentenced to 25 years to life in prison, becoming one of the first female school shooters in American history and among the youngest mass murderers of the era. She was initially incarcerated at the California Institution for Women, where she was frequently involved in violent incidents with other inmates and staff. In 1993, she was attacked and beaten by 2 other prisoners, suffering a fractured skull and other injuries. She later married a fellow inmate, but the relationship ended in divorce. Over the decades, Brenda has become something of a prison lawyer, filing numerous lawsuits against the California Department of Corrections regarding conditions of confinement, access to programs, and medical care. She has been denied parole 4 times, first in 1993, then in 2001, 2005, and 2009. At each hearing, Survivors and family members of her victims have testified against her release, and she has consistently been found unsuitable due to lack of insight into her crimes and failure to demonstrate genuine remorse. Her next parole eligibility was originally scheduled for 2019 but was delayed, and she remains incarcerated at the California Institution for Women in Chino. The Cleveland elementary school shooting fundamentally changed how American law enforcement and school systems responded to threats of violence, contributing to the development of threat assessment protocols and crisis response plans that would become standard in subsequent decades. The case also raised enduring questions about parental responsibility, gun access for troubled youth, and the intersection of mental health services and violent behavior prediction. Number 2. Barry Lukitis, whose classroom siege in Frontier, Washington left an indelible scar on the nation's consciousness. Barry Dale Lukitis was born on February 26, 1981, in Moses Lake, Washington, a small city in the agricultural heartland of the state. His childhood appeared unremarkable from the outside. His parents, Joe and Phillips and Terry Lukitis, were both teachers, and the family maintained a middle-class lifestyle. However, beneath the surface, Barry was developing severe psychological disturbances. From an early age, he displayed symptoms of depression, anxiety, and what would later be diagnosed as bipolar disorder. He was obsessed with violent media, particularly the novel Rage by Stephen King, written under the pseudonym Richard Bachman, which detailed a school hostage situation with disturbing parallels to what Barry would eventually orchestrate. He also immersed himself in films like Natural Born Killers and the western The Basketball Diaries, particularly a scene involving a school shooting fantasy. By early 1996, Barry was 14 years old and attending Frontier Middle School. He had become increasingly isolated, wearing long black coats and dark clothing regardless of weather, and had confided in at least one acquaintance that he planned to do something terrible. His mother, concerned about his mental state, had taken him to a psychiatrist who prescribed Prozac, then a relatively new treatment for depression in adolescents. Whether due to the medication itself or the underlying condition, Barry's behavior became more erratic. He began preparing for his attack with methodical precision. Over several months, he stole pistols and ammunition from his father's gun collection and his grandmother's residence. He constructed a distant weapon harness that would allow him to carry multiple firearms concealed beneath his coat. He practiced drawing and firing in the rural areas around Moses Lake. He wrote violent poetry and journal entries that referenced his plan, though these were not discovered until after the attack. On February 2, 1996, Barry dressed in his characteristic black duster coat and armed himself with a .30-30 Winchester rifle, 2 handguns, and approximately 70 rounds of ammunition hidden in his harness. He arrived at Frontier Middle School during 5th period algebra class in room 15. Without warning, he drew the rifle and shot his teacher, Leona Cares, who was standing at the chalkboard, killing her instantly. He then turned the weapon on his classmates, killing Manuel Vela and Arnold Fritz. A 14-year-old girl, Natalie Brooks, was seriously wounded but survived. Barry then took the remaining students hostage, forcing them to barricade the door and demanding a telephone to call a television station. His plan began to unravel when a gym coach, John Lane, heard the shots and approached the classroom. Barry allowed him to enter, apparently intending to use him as another hostage, but Lane seized an opportunity to wrestle the rifle away as Barry attempted to switch weapons. Other students helped subdue him, and Lane held him until police arrived. The entire incident lasted approximately 20 minutes. During interrogation, Barry was initially coherent, explaining that he had planned the attack for months and that he wanted to kill as many people as possible before dying himself in a shootout with police, which he envisioned as a Natural Born Killers style finale. He expressed particular anger toward Mrs. Cares, whom he felt had unfairly graded him, though this grievance was objectively minor. As the questioning continued, he became increasingly detached and childlike, at one point asking if he would be able to finish his algebra homework in detention. His trial was moved to adult court due to the severity of the charges, a decision that was controversial given his age and documented mental illness. Defense attorneys argued that Prozac had induced a manic state that removed his capacity for rational judgment, citing emerging research on SSRIs and violent behavior in adolescents. Prosecutors countered with evidence of his meticulous planning, his statements during the attack, and his clear desire for notoriety. On September 24, 1997, Barry Lukaitis was convicted of 2 counts of aggravated first-degree murder, 1 count of second-degree murder, and 1 count of attempted aggravated first-degree murder. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The conviction and sentence were upheld on appeal, with courts rejecting arguments about medication effects and improper transfer to adult jurisdiction. Barry was initially incarcerated at a juvenile facility before transfer to adult prison upon turning 18. He has been held at multiple Washington state correctional institutions, including the Washington State Penitentiary in Walla Walla. In 2012, he filed a petition for resentencing following a United States Supreme Court decision that mandatory life without parole for juvenile offenders constituted cruel and unusual punishment. After extensive hearings, he was resentenced in 2017 to 189 years in prison, effectively a life sentence that technically allows for parole consideration after 51 years, when he would be in his 60s. He remains incarcerated with his next parole eligibility in the 2060s. The Frontier Middle School shooting was among the first to generate widespread national discussion about the influence of violent media on adolescent behavior, though subsequent research has largely debunked direct causal relationships. It also contributed to debates about SSRI medications and violence. Prozac's manufacturer, Eli Lilly, faced numerous lawsuits in subsequent years alleging failure to warn about potential behavioral side effects in young people. The case remains a touchstone in discussions of school violence, mental health treatment of adolescents, and the appropriate balance between punishment and rehabilitation for juvenile offenders who commit adult crimes. Number 3. Evan Ramsey, whose assault on his Alaska high school brought frontier isolation into harsh focus. Evan Ethan Ramsey was born on February 8, 1981, in Anchorage, Alaska, though much of his early childhood was spent in the remote village of Bethel, a community of approximately 5,000 people accessible only by air or river barge, located 400 miles west of Anchorage on the Kuskokwim River. His family circumstances were extraordinarily troubled. His father, Donald Ramsey, was a violent alcoholic who subjected Evan and his mother, Carol, to frequent physical abuse. When Evan was 7 years old, his father committed suicide by shooting himself in the head while Evan was in the house, an experience that would profoundly traumatize the boy. His mother subsequently struggled with alcoholism and mental health issues, and Evan was shuffled between relatives and foster homes, experiencing neglect and instability throughout his formative years. By adolescence, he was living with his mother in Bethel but spending much of his time isolated in his room, immersed in video games and early internet culture. He was particularly obsessed with the game Doom and had created numerous levels featuring his school, Bethel Regional High School, as a setting for violent scenarios. He was also active on early internet forums where he discussed weapons and expressed violent fantasies. His social isolation was extreme. He was frequently bullied at school for his awkward manner, his poverty, and his family history. School administrators were aware of his disturbing interests and his creation of violent game levels featuring the school, but in the context of 1990s Alaska, where gun culture was ubiquitous and mental health resources virtually non-existent in remote communities, these warning signs were not treated with appropriate urgency. On February 19, 1997, 2 days after his 16th birthday, Evan Ramsey loaded a Mossberg 500 shotgun his father had left behind and walked into Bethel Regional High School. He first went to the student commons area, where he encountered and shot 15-year-old Josh Palacios, a popular student who had apparently never directly bullied Evan, but represented the social world from which he felt excluded. He then proceeded to the administrative offices, where he killed Principal Ron Edwards and injured 2 others. The entire attack lasted approximately 10 minutes, after which Evan surrendered to arriving police without resistance. During interrogation, he was initially cooperative, explaining that he had planned the attack for several months and that he wanted to punish the school for his mistreatment. However, as questioning continued, he became increasingly distressed and eventually requested an attorney. His trial was complicated by the unique circumstances of Alaska's legal system and the profound isolation of Bethel. The community was deeply divided, with many residents acknowledging the systemic failures that had produced Evan while simultaneously demanding accountability for the deaths of 2 beloved community members. Defense attorneys argued that Evan's profound trauma, his documented history of abuse and neglect, and his untreated mental illness rendered him less culpable, though they stopped short of an insanity defense. Prosecutors emphasized the calculated nature of the attack, his months of preparation, and the innocent victims who had no direct connection to his grievances. On December 2, 1998, Evan Ramsey was convicted of 2 counts of first-degree murder and numerous lesser charges. He was sentenced to 210 years in prison. Unlike many juvenile offenders, he was not immediately transferred to adult prison. Instead, he remained in juvenile facilities until age 21, then was moved to the Spring Creek Correctional Center in Seward, Alaska's maximum security prison. Evan has been remarkably prolific during his incarceration, becoming one of Alaska's most litigious prisoners. He has filed dozens of lawsuits challenging prison conditions, his sentence, and various administrative decisions. In 2007, he successfully challenged a prison policy restricting his access to legal materials, with the Alaska Supreme Court ruling in his favor. He has also become something of a prison journalist, writing extensively about correctional conditions and juvenile justice reform for various publications. His most significant legal challenge came in 2012, when he sought resentencing following the Supreme Court's Miller v. Alabama decision prohibiting mandatory life without parole for juvenile offenders. After extensive proceedings, the Alaska Supreme Court ruled in 2018 that his sentence was discretionary rather than mandatory and therefore constitutional, though they encouraged the parole board to give meaningful consideration to his youth at the time of the offense. Evan Ramsey remains incarcerated at Spring Creek Correctional Center. His case has been extensively studied by juvenile justice researchers as an example of how extreme childhood trauma can contribute to violent behavior, and he has participated in numerous academic interviews and documentary projects. The Bethel school shooting prompted significant changes in Alaska's approach to school safety and mental health in remote communities, though resource limitations continue to constrain effective implementation. At his most recent parole hearing in 2023, he was denied release but received praise from board members for his educational achievements and institutional conduct, suggesting the possibility of future consideration. Number 4. Michael Carneal, whose attack on a Kentucky prayer circle raised unanswerable questions about evil and adolescents. Michael Adam Carneal was born on May 1, 1983, in Paducah, Kentucky, the son of John Carneal, a prominent local attorney, and his wife, Ann. The Carneal family was well established in Paducah society. Michael's grandfather had been a federal judge, and the family maintained connections to the region's legal and political elite. Michael attended Heath High School, a well-regarded public school in the affluent suburb of West Paducah. From the outside, his life appeared privileged and unremarkable. He was intelligent, achieving good grades with minimal effort, and participated in school activities including the band and academic teams. However, beneath this surface, Michael was experiencing severe psychological distress that would not become fully apparent until after his crimes. He was obsessed with violent media, particularly films like The Basketball Diaries and Natural Born Killers, and had developed an elaborate fantasy life involving violent revenge against classmates he perceived as having wronged him. These slights were largely imaginary or exaggerated. While Michael believed himself persecuted, most students barely registered his presence. He had also developed an obsession with Satanism, though this appears to have been more aesthetic and rebellious than genuinely theological. In the months before his attack, Michael had engaged in increasingly bizarre behavior, including breaking into a neighbor's house to steal items he later claimed were for satanic rituals. He had also stolen pistols from his father's collection and from a neighbor, accumulating a small arsenal without anyone's knowledge. On December 1, 1997, 14-year-old Michael Carneal arrived at Heath High School armed with a pair of shotguns, 2 rifles, a pistol, and 700 rounds of ammunition concealed in a duffel bag. He had originally planned a much larger attack, intending to shoot students in the hallways and then proceed to a second school. However, he instead went directly to the school's main lobby, where a daily prayer circle met before classes. Approximately 30 students had gathered for this informal religious observance. Michael opened fire with the pistol, firing 8 shots in rapid succession. He did not aim at specific targets. Instead, he fired randomly into the group. 3 students, Nicole Hadley, Jessica James, and Case Stager, were killed. 5 others were wounded, including Missy Jenkins, who was paralyzed from the chest down and would spend her life in a wheelchair. The attack lasted approximately 10 seconds. Michael then dropped the weapon and was subdued by the school's principal, Bill Bond, who had rushed to the scene upon hearing the shots. Bond later described Michael as calm and detached, offering no resistance and making no attempt to flee. During interrogation, Michael was cooperative but evasive. He claimed to have been influenced by satanic forces and to have heard voices commanding him to kill, though he provided inconsistent details about these experiences. He also expressed surprise at his own actions, stating that he had not expected to actually go through with the attack and that he felt like someone else was doing it. Psychological evaluation revealed a complex picture. Michael exhibited symptoms consistent with early-onset schizophrenia, including delusions, hallucinations, and disorganized thinking, but also demonstrated clear awareness of his actions and their wrongfulness at the time of the attack. His trial began in November 1998. The prosecution presented evidence of his meticulous planning, his accumulation of weapons, and his statements suggesting clear intent. The defense argued that his documented mental illness rendered him legally insane, though this required proving that he did not understand the wrongfulness of his actions, a high bar given his apparent efforts at concealment and his coherent statements during preparation. On December 17, 1998, the jury rejected the insanity defense and convicted Michael Carneal of 3 counts of murder and 5 counts of attempted murder. He was sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 25 years. Michael was initially incarcerated at a juvenile facility before transfer to Kentucky State Penitentiary. His mental health declined significantly in prison. He was diagnosed with schizophrenia and has received continuous psychiatric treatment, including antipsychotic medications, throughout his incarceration. He has also become deeply religious, participating in prison ministry programs and expressing what many observers view as genuine remorse for his crimes. In 2012, he sought parole for the first time, arguing that his mental illness, youth at the time of the offense, and excellent institutional record warranted release to a psychiatric facility. The parole board denied his request, citing the severity of his crimes and the need for further demonstration of rehabilitation. He has been denied parole in subsequent hearings in 2017 and 2022. At the 2022 hearing, Several victims and family members testified against his release, including Missy Jenkins, who would become a prominent advocate for school safety and disability rights. The board noted his mental health improvements but concluded that he remained a risk to public safety. Michael Carneal remains incarcerated at the Kentucky State Penitentiary in Eddyville. His next parole eligibility is in 2027, when he will have served 30 years. The Heath High School shooting was the first to generate significant national discussion about the influence of prayer in schools on violence, with some commentators absurdly suggesting the attack represented divine punishment for religious observance. More productively, it contributed to growing awareness of adolescent mental illness and the potential for early-onset schizophrenia to manifest in violent behavior. The case remains a focal point in debates about the appropriate balance between punishment and treatment for offenders whose crimes appear to stem from untreated mental illness. Number 5. Andrew Golden and Mitchell Johnson, whose middle school ambush in Arkansas revealed the deadly potential of adolescent collaboration. Andrew Douglas Golden was born on May 25, 1986, in Jonesboro, Arkansas, the son of a local firefighter and a homemaker. Mitchell Scott Johnson was born on August 11, 1984, in Grand Rapids, Minnesota, but had moved to Jonesboro with his family in 1994 when his parents separated and his mother relocated to be near relatives. The two boys met at Westside Middle School in 1997, when Andrew was 11 and Mitchell was 13. Despite the age difference, they formed an intense friendship based on shared interests in weapons, violent video games, and elaborate revenge fantasies against classmates and teachers they perceived as having wronged them. Mitchell, the older of the two, appears to have been the dominant personality in the relationship. He had a history of behavioral problems, including an incident in which he threatened a classmate with a knife and was briefly institutionalized. He was also known to have molested a younger child, though this was not widely known at the time. His parents were in the midst of a contentious divorce, and he was living with his mother in a state of significant instability. Andrew, by contrast, came from a more stable home but was obsessed with guns and military culture. His father and grandfather had taught him to shoot, and he had access to a substantial collection of firearms. The two boys spent months planning their attack. They established a detailed timeline, assigned specific roles, and conducted surveillance of the school to identify optimal positions. Their plan was sophisticated for their ages. They would pull the fire alarm to evacuate the building, then ambush students and teachers as they gathered outside, creating maximum casualties before fleeing to a nearby wooded area where they had cached additional weapons and supplies for extended survival. On the evening of March 23, 1998, Andrew stole numerous firearms from his grandfather's house, including a Remington 7.42 rifle, a Universal M1 carbine, 3 pistols, and several thousand rounds of ammunition. The boys loaded these into Mitchell's mother's minivan, along with camping gear, food supplies, and cold weather clothing. They also took Mitchell's mother's car keys without her knowledge. They spent the night at Andrew's house, leaving early the next morning. On March 24, 1998, the boys drove to Westside Middle School, arriving shortly before classes were scheduled to begin. They parked in a wooded area adjacent to the school and positioned themselves in the woods, approximately 100 yards from the building. At approximately 12:45 p.m., Mitchell went inside and pulled the fire alarm. As students and teachers filed out of the building in orderly evacuation procedures, Andrew opened fire with the rifle, and Mitchell joined with the carbine. They fired repeatedly into the crowd of evacuees, killing 4 students, Paige and Herring, Stephanie Johnson, Natalie Brooks, and Brittany Varner, and 1 teacher, Shannon Wright, who was shielding students with her body. 10 others were wounded. The boys then fled into the woods as police arrived, but they were quickly apprehended by responding officers who had been alerted by 911 calls. The entire incident lasted approximately 15 minutes. During interrogation, Both boys were initially defiant, with Mitchell claiming they had planned to kill around 200 people and expressing disappointment at their lower body count. Andrew was more subdued but fully cooperative, providing detailed accounts of their preparations. Both claimed to have been motivated by bullying and mistreatment, though investigations revealed minimal actual conflict. Like many school shooters, their grievances were largely imaginary constructs. The case presented unprecedented legal challenges. At 11 and 13, Andrew and Mitchell were among the youngest mass murderers in American history. Arkansas law at the time did not allow for the transfer of children under 14 to adult court, and the maximum sentence available in juvenile court was incarceration until age 18. After extensive legal proceedings, both were convicted of 5 counts of murder and 10 counts of assault. Mitchell, being older, was sentenced to the maximum available under Arkansas law at that time: confinement in juvenile facilities until age 18, followed by a suspended sentence with intensive probation. Andrew received a similar disposition. Both were released from juvenile custody in 2005, having turned 18. Mitchell Johnson's post-release life was marked by continuous criminality. He was arrested repeatedly for drug possession, theft, and firearms violations. In 2007, he was charged with possession of a firearm by a felon and possession of marijuana with intent to distribute after a traffic stop in Arkansas. He was convicted and sentenced to 4 years in federal prison, followed by additional state sentences. He was released in 2015 but continued to struggle with addiction and criminal involvement. In 2021, he was arrested again on drug charges and remains incarcerated in Arkansas. Andrew Golden's post-release trajectory was different. He changed his name to Drew Douglas Grant and attempted to build a new life. He married and worked various jobs, apparently avoiding significant legal trouble for over a decade. However, in 2016, he was arrested in Missouri on firearms charges after providing false information on a federal form to purchase weapons. He was convicted and sentenced to imprisonment. While incarcerated, he applied for a concealed carry permit under his new name, claiming no criminal history. This application triggered a background check that revealed his true identity and prior convictions. In 2019, Andrew Golden was killed in a car accident in northeastern Arkansas when the vehicle he was driving left the road and struck a tree. He was 33 years old. The West Side Middle School shooting prompted substantial changes in Arkansas law, including provisions allowing younger children to be tried as adults for serious violent crimes. It also generated extensive research on juvenile teen killers and the dynamics of adolescent dyads in violent crime. The case remains unique in American criminal history for the extreme youth of the perpetrators and the calculated sophistication of their attack. Number 6. Kipland Kinkle, whose rampage through a Oregon high school shattered a community's sense of safety. Kipland Philip Kinkle was born on August 30, 1982, in Springfield, Oregon, the son of William Kinkle, a Spanish teacher of some local prominence, and Faith Kinkle, a homemaker. The Kinkle family was well respected in the Springfield community. William was a beloved teacher at Thurston High School, and the family lived in a comfortable rural home outside the city. From an early age, Kip, as he was known, exhibited signs of significant psychological disturbance. He was diagnosed with depression in early adolescence and was briefly hospitalized after expressing suicidal ideation. He was also receiving treatment for obsessive-compulsive disorder and showed symptoms consistent with emerging schizophrenia, including auditory hallucinations and paranoid delusions. Despite these warning signs, his parents, perhaps because of their professional backgrounds in education, attempted to manage his conditions through therapy and medication rather than more intensive intervention. Kip's fascination with violence was extensive and well documented. He was obsessed with firearms, explosives, and violent literature, particularly the works of Shakespeare, which he interpreted through a lens of nihilistic violence. He had assembled a substantial collection of weapons, including several purchased legally by his parents, and had constructed numerous explosive devices in the family home. In early 1998, at age 15, Kip was arrested after purchasing a stolen pistol from a classmate. His parents were contacted, and rather than facing serious legal consequences, Kip was suspended from school and required to complete community service. His parents, apparently believing this incident represented normal adolescent boundary testing, continued to allow him access to firearms. This decision would prove fatal. On the evening of May 20, 1998, Kip's parents confronted him about his continued misbehavior and his apparent failure to take his psychiatric medications. The precise details of this confrontation remain unclear, but it ended with Kip shooting his father in the back of the head with the pistol his father had purchased for him. He waited for his mother to return home, then shot her multiple times, killing her as well. He dragged both bodies to the bathroom and covered them with a sheet. Rather than fleeing, Kip spent the night in the house with his parents' bodies, preparing for the next phase of his plan. The following morning, May 21st, he drove the family car to Thurston High School, arriving shortly before classes began. He was wearing a trench coat concealing 3 firearms: a Ruger .22 rifle, a 9mm pistol, and a .22 pistol, along with approximately 1,000 rounds of ammunition and several explosive devices. He entered the school's main hallway and immediately opened fire. He killed 1 student, Ben Walker, and wounded 23 others, some critically. The attack was stopped when several students, including Jacob Riker, who was himself wounded, tackled Kip and held him until police arrived. The entire incident in the school lasted approximately 2 minutes. During interrogation, Kip was initially coherent but became increasingly disorganized and psychotic. He claimed to have been driven by voices commanding him to kill and expressed elaborate paranoid beliefs about conspiracies against him. Psychological evaluation confirmed a diagnosis of paranoid schizophrenia with psychotic features, though this did not meet legal standards for insanity given his demonstrated capacity for planning and concealment. His trial was delayed for over a year while he received intensive psychiatric treatment to restore competency. When the trial finally proceeded in 1999, defense attorneys argued that his severe mental illness, combined with his youth, warranted consideration of mitigating factors. Prosecutors emphasized the calculated nature of his crimes, including his murder of his parents as prelude to the school attack. On September 24, 1999, Kip Kinkle pleaded guilty to 4 counts of murder and numerous lesser charges, avoiding a trial. He was sentenced to 111 years in prison without the possibility of parole. He was initially incarcerated at the Oregon State Correctional Institution and has been held at various facilities throughout the Oregon prison system. In 2007, he filed a federal habeas corpus petition arguing that his attorneys had provided ineffective assistance by failing to adequately pursue an insanity defense and by allowing him to plead guilty while incompetent. This petition was denied. In 2019, he sought resentencing following the Supreme Court's decisions in Miller v. Alabama and Montgomery v. Louisiana, which held that mandatory life without parole for juvenile offenders was unconstitutional. The Oregon Supreme Court ruled in 2021 that his sentence was discretionary rather than mandatory and therefore constitutional, though they noted that his youth and mental illness should be considered in any future parole proceedings. Kip Kinkle remains incarcerated at the Oregon State Correctional Institution in Salem. He has participated in extensive psychiatric treatment and has been described by prison officials as a model inmate. His case has been extensively studied as an example of how severe untreated mental illness in adolescents can manifest in catastrophic violence, and he has cooperated with numerous research projects and documentary efforts. The Thurston High School shooting was among the first to generate significant national discussion about the responsibility of parents for the violent actions of their children, given the Kinkles' documented knowledge of their sons' disturbing behavior and their continued provision of firearms. Number 7. Dylan Klebold and Eric Harris, whose attack on Columbine High School fundamentally transformed American society. Eric David Harris was born on April 9, 1981, in Wichita, Kansas, the son of an Air Force pilot, Wayne Harris, and his wife, Catherine. Dylan Bennett Klebold was born on September 11, 1981, in Lakewood, Colorado, the son of a geophysicist, Thomas Klebold, and his wife, Susan, a former community college counselor. Both families were upwardly mobile professionals who had relocated to Littleton, Colorado, a suburb of Denver, in search of better opportunities. Eric moved to Littleton in 1993 when his father retired from the military. Dylan had lived there since early childhood. The two met at Ken Carroll Middle School in 1995 and formed an intense friendship based on shared interests in violent video games, industrial music, and elaborate revenge fantasies against the social hierarchy of Columbine High School, which they attended beginning in 1996. Their relationship was complex and asymmetrical. Eric appears to have been the dominant personality, characterized by psychologists who later analyzed his writings as a prototypical psychopath with grandiose delusions of superiority, absence of empathy, and sadistic enjoyment of others' suffering. Dylan, by contrast, appears to have been severely depressed and suicidal, drawn to Eric's certainty and vision as an escape from his own psychological pain. Together, they developed an elaborate ideology they called NBK, derived from the film Natural Born Killers, which they viewed as a template for revolutionary violence that would make them famous and punish a society they viewed as irredeemably corrupt. For over a year, they planned their attack with meticulous care. They acquired firearms through a straw purchase by an older acquaintance, Mark Maneys, who purchased a TCDC-9 semi-automatic pistol and 2 shotguns for them. They also constructed approximately 99 explosive devices, including pipe bombs, CO2 canister bombs, and propane tank explosives, intended to cause mass casualties in the school cafeteria. Their plan was extraordinarily ambitious. They would enter the school during lunch, when approximately 500 students would be in the cafeteria, and detonate their explosives, killing hundreds. They would then shoot survivors as they fled the building, and finally commit suicide as police arrived, achieving immortal notoriety. On the morning of April 20, 1999, Eric and Dylan arrived at Columbine High School separately, each driving his own vehicle. Eric parked in the senior parking lot, Dylan in the junior lot. They entered the cafeteria together, carrying 2 duffel bags containing propane tank bombs set to detonate at 11:17 a.m. They exited the building and returned to their cars to wait. When the bombs failed to detonate due to faulty wiring, they approached the school with their firearms, Eric with a carbine and the TCDC-9, Dylan with a shotgun and a pistol, and began shooting outside, killing 1 student, Rachel Scott, and wounding others. They then entered the building through the west entrance, shooting indiscriminately at students and faculty. They killed 12 people inside the school: Daniel Rohrbaugh, Steve Kerno, Kyle Velasquez, Matthew Kechter, Lauren Townsend, John Tomlin, Kelly Fleming, Daniel Mauser, Corey DePuter, Isaiah Shoels, Cassie Bernal, and Dave Sanders, a teacher who died hours later while awaiting rescue. 24 others were wounded. The shooters wandered through the school for approximately 45 minutes, taunting victims, vandalizing property, and attempting to detonate their remaining explosives. They finally entered the school library, where they killed themselves simultaneously at approximately 12:08 p.m. The Columbine massacre generated unprecedented media coverage and public response. It was the deadliest school shooting in American history at that time, and its live television coverage, including helicopter footage of students fleeing the building, created indelible images that fundamentally changed American consciousness about school safety. The subsequent investigation revealed extensive warning signs that had been missed or inadequately addressed. Eric and Dylan had been arrested in January 1998 for breaking into a van and stealing electronics. During the subsequent juvenile diversion program, they had produced a video project for school that included explicit references to violent revenge against classmates. They had posted violent threats and bomb-making instructions on a website Eric had created. They had acquired weapons and practiced shooting in remote areas, behavior known to some acquaintances. Most significantly, they had completed their arsenal and final preparations in the weeks before the attack, behavior that went unnoticed by parents who later claimed no knowledge of their son's activities. The investigation also debunked numerous early media narratives. Contrary to initial reports, the shooters were not members of a trenchcoat mafia goth group, nor were they specifically targeting jocks or Christians. Their victims were essentially random, selected by opportunity rather than identity. They were not bullied outcasts seeking revenge on specific tormentors. Rather, they were middle-class students with their own friendship circles who had constructed an elaborate ideological justification for mass murder. The aftermath of Columbine extended far beyond the immediate community. It prompted fundamental changes in American law enforcement, including the development of active shooter protocols that replaced previous approaches emphasizing containment and negotiation. It generated billions of dollars in school security expenditures nationwide. It contributed to ongoing debates about gun control, violent media, and adolescent mental health that continue today. It also produced significant negative consequences, including numerous copycat threats and attacks, a substantial increase in school zero-tolerance policies that disproportionately affected minority students, and what some researchers have termed a Columbine effect of increased shooter attention to media coverage and body counts. Eric Harris and Dylan Klebold died by suicide at the scene and therefore faced no legal proceedings. Their families faced extensive civil litigation, eventually settling with numerous victims' families for undisclosed amounts. Mark Maney's, who provided the firearms, was convicted of supplying a weapon to a minor and possession of a sawed-off shotgun, serving 19 months in prison. The parents of both shooters have maintained largely private lives, though Sue Klebold, Dylan's mother, published a memoir in 2016 about her experience, generating significant controversy. The Columbine shooting remains the most studied and referenced school massacre in American history, its influence extending to subsequent attacks including Virginia Tech, Sandy Hook, and Parkland, where shooters explicitly referenced Eric and Dylan as inspiration. The school building itself was extensively renovated, with the library where most deaths occurred demolished and replaced. Annual commemorations continue, and the name Columbine has become synonymous with school violence in American cultural discourse. Number 8. Charles Williams, whose suburban California school shooting revealed the hidden darkness of adolescent despair. Charles Andrew Williams was born on February 8, 1986, in Frederick, Maryland, the son of Charles Jeffrey Williams, a software engineer, and his wife, Lavinia. His parents divorced when he was 5, and he spent his childhood alternating between households, experiencing the instability common to many children of divorce. In 2000, when Charles was 14, his father accepted a position with a technology company in California and moved with Charles to the affluent San Diego suburb of Santee, while Charles's mother and older brother remained in Maryland. The move was difficult for Charles. He was a slight, physically unremarkable teenager who struggled to establish social connections in his new environment. He attended Santana High School, where he was largely invisible to the social mainstream, neither bullied nor embraced. He developed a small friendship circle centered on skateboarding and music, but these relationships appear to have been superficial. His father worked long hours, and Charles spent much of his time alone in their apartment. In the months before his attack, Charles's behavior had become increasingly concerning to those who knew him. He had told several acquaintances that he planned to pull a Columbine and had shown them firearms he had acquired. These warnings were not taken seriously. In the context of 2001, when school shooting threats had become common teenage hyperbole, friends assumed he was joking or seeking attention. He had also become increasingly involved with self-harm, cutting himself and expressing suicidal ideation. His father, apparently unaware of the severity of his son's distress, had purchased him a computer and allowed him considerable unsupervised time. On March 5, 2001, 15-year-old Charles Williams arrived at Santana High School carrying a .22 caliber revolver he had borrowed without permission from his father's gun collection, along with additional ammunition. He entered a boys' bathroom near the school's quad area and opened fire on students entering the facility. He killed 2 students, Randy Gordon, a 17-year-old senior, and Brian Zucker, a 14-year-old freshman. 13 others were wounded, some seriously. The entire attack lasted approximately 6 minutes. Charles was subdued by students and a teacher, Tim Estep, who had rushed to the scene upon hearing the shots. Unlike many school shooters, Charles offered no resistance and was described as calm and detached during his arrest. During interrogation, he was cooperative and immediately confessed, explaining that he had planned the attack for several weeks and that he wanted to kill himself but had been unable to do so. He claimed to have been motivated by depression and social isolation rather than specific grievances, and he expressed surprise and some distress at having killed others when his primary intention had been self-destruction. His trial was moved to adult court, where he faced 2 counts of murder and 13 counts of attempted murder. Defense attorneys argued that his youth, his documented depression, and the circumstances of his recent relocation warranted consideration of mitigating factors, though they did not pursue an insanity defense given his clear awareness of his actions. Prosecutors emphasized the deaths of 2 innocent students and the trauma inflicted on an entire community. On August 15, 2002, Charles Williams pleaded guilty to all charges, avoiding a trial. He was sentenced to 50 years to life in prison. He was initially incarcerated at a juvenile facility before transfer to adult prison at age 18. Charles has become something of a model prisoner during his incarceration, completing his high school education and participating in vocational training programs. He has expressed remorse for his crimes in various settings, including a 2013 interview with a San Diego television station in which he apologized to his victims and their families. He has been denied parole multiple times, most recently in 2021, with the board citing the severity of his crimes and the need for continued demonstration of rehabilitation. His next parole eligibility is in 2031. The Santana High School shooting was significant for its timing, occurring less than 2 years after Columbine, and for its demonstration that school violence was not confined to any particular region or demographic. The relatively affluent suburban setting of Santee, with its good schools and stable families, challenged narratives that explained school shootings through poverty or social dysfunction. The case also highlighted the problem of threat assessment in an era when school shooting references had become common teenage discourse. Several students had heard Charles's warnings but had not reported them, assuming they were not serious. Number 9. Jeff Weiss, whose assault on a Minnesota reservation school exposed intersecting crises of identity, trauma, and violence. Jeffrey James Weiss was born on August 8, 1988, in Minneapolis, Minnesota, the only child of Joan Weiss, an Ojibwe woman from the Red Lake Indian Reservation, and Darrell Lucier, an Ojibwe man from the same community. His childhood was marked by extraordinary trauma and instability. When Jeff was approximately 2 years old, his father committed suicide by shooting himself after a domestic dispute, an event Jeff would later claim to have witnessed. though this has not been definitively established. His mother subsequently struggled with alcoholism and mental illness, and Jeff was raised primarily by his paternal grandmother, Shelda Lucier, on the Red Lake Reservation. The Red Lake Reservation, located in northern Minnesota, is one of the most isolated and impoverished communities in the United States, with limited economic opportunities and significant social problems stemming from historical trauma and ongoing systemic neglect. Jeff experienced severe bullying throughout his childhood, both for his mixed heritage and for his physical appearance. He was tall and heavy, with distinctive features that made him a target. He was also clearly experiencing serious mental health problems from an early age. He was hospitalized at least twice for suicidal ideation and was receiving treatment for depression and what would later be characterized as emerging psychotic symptoms. He was obsessed with violent media, particularly Nazi ideology and the Columbine shooters, whom he viewed as heroes. He had created numerous online personas in which he expressed white supremacist views, despite his own Native American heritage, suggesting a complex and confused engagement with identity and belonging. He had also expressed interest in becoming a famous shooter and had conducted research on previous school massacres. On March 21, 2005, 16-year-old Jeff Weiss murdered his grandfather, Darrell Lucier, a tribal police officer, with Lucier's own service weapon, a shotgun. He also killed Lucier's girlfriend, Michelle Sagana, who was present in the house. He then took his grandfather's police vehicle, weapons, and ballistic vest, and drove to Red Lake Senior High School, arriving shortly before classes were scheduled to end. He entered the school through the main entrance and immediately opened fire. He killed an unarmed security guard, Derek Brunn, then proceeded through the hallways, entering classrooms and shooting randomly. He killed 7 students: Chanel Rosebear, Chase Lucier, Dwayne Lewis, Darrell Lucier III, Neva Wincoop Rogers, Stacy Dow, and Thurleen Stillday. He wounded 5 others. The entire attack lasted approximately 10 minutes. Jeff then returned to a classroom where he had earlier killed students and fatally shot himself. The Red Lake shooting was the deadliest school massacre since Columbine and the first to occur on a Native American reservation. It generated significant national attention to conditions in reservation communities, including poverty, lack of mental health resources, and the intergenerational effects of historical trauma. The investigation revealed that Jeff had been known to tribal authorities and school officials as deeply troubled, with numerous red flags including his online activities and direct statements about violence. However, the resources available to address these concerns in the chronically underfunded reservation system were minimal, and no effective intervention had occurred. Because Jeff Weiss died by suicide, no criminal proceedings were conducted. His mother, Joanne, who had been largely absent from his life due to her own struggles, filed a lawsuit against the manufacturer of Prozac, which Jeff had been prescribed, alleging that the medication had contributed to his violent behavior. This lawsuit was dismissed. The Red Lake community engaged in extensive healing efforts in the years following the shooting, including traditional Ojibwe ceremonies and the construction of a new school building. The case remains significant in discussions of school violence for its intersection of multiple factors: adolescent mental illness, cultural displacement, historical trauma, and systemic neglect of Native American communities. It has been extensively studied by researchers interested in how socioeconomic and cultural context shapes the expression of adolescent violence. Number 10. Seung-Hui Cho, whose massacre at Virginia Tech represented the deadliest school shooting in American history and forced fundamental reconsideration of campus security and mental health intervention. Seung-Hui Cho was born on January 18, 1984, in Asan, South Korea, the second of 3 children of Seung-Tae Cho and his wife, Kang Yim. The family immigrated to the United States in 1992, when Seung-Hui was 8 years old, settling in the suburbs of Washington, D.C. His parents operated a dry cleaning business, working long hours to establish their family in a new country. From an early age, Seung-Hui exhibited signs of severe psychological disturbance. He was selectively mute, rarely speaking even to family members, and was diagnosed with selective mutism and major depression in early adolescence. He received some treatment, including therapy and medication, but his parents, perhaps due to cultural stigma around mental illness or simple exhaustion from their working lives, were not consistent in ensuring he followed treatment protocols. By high school, Seung-Hui's social isolation was extreme. He had no friends, participated in no activities, and was frequently the target of bullying due to his silence and his accented English. He developed elaborate revenge fantasies and violent writings that alarmed some teachers but were not reported to authorities or his parents. He graduated from Westfield High School in 2003 and was accepted to Virginia Tech University, a large public institution in Blacksburg, Virginia, where he enrolled as an English major. His time at Virginia Tech was characterized by continuous psychological deterioration. His roommates found him so disturbing that several requested transfers. He was accused of stalking 2 female students, though charges were not filed. His creative writing assignments were so violent and disturbing that several professors referred him to the University Counseling Center. In December 2005, after a female student reported that Seung-Hui had been taking photographs of her from underneath her desk, he was involuntarily committed to a psychiatric hospital for evaluation. A special justice found him to present an imminent danger to himself or others and ordered outpatient treatment. However, due to limitations in information sharing between mental health and legal systems, this commitment was not entered into the National Background Check Database, and Seung-Hui was able to legally purchase firearms in the months following his release. In the weeks before his attack, Seung-Hui's behavior became increasingly erratic. He stopped attending classes and spent his time in his dorm room, preparing for what he viewed as his final statement. He purchased 2 firearms, a Walther P22 pistol and a Glock 19 pistol, along with numerous ammunition magazines. He created an elaborate multimedia manifesto, including photographs of himself in aggressive poses with weapons and a video statement in which he compared himself to Jesus Christ and expressed rage against the wealthy and privileged he believed had tormented him. On the morning of April 16, 2007, Seung-Hui went to the West Ambler Johnston Residence Hall, where he shared a room with another student. He encountered freshman Emily Hilscher in the hallway and shot her. When resident advisor Ryan Clark came to investigate, he shot Clark as well. Both died. Seung-Hui then returned to his room, changed his clothes, and walked to the university's central campus area. He entered Norris Hall, a classroom building, chaining the main entrance doors to delay police response. He then proceeded systematically through 4 classrooms on the 2nd floor, shooting students and faculty without discrimination. He fired approximately 174 rounds over approximately 9 minutes, killing 30 people and wounding 17 others. When police finally breached the chain doors, Seung-Hui shot himself in the head. The Virginia Tech massacre was the deadliest school shooting in American history and, at that time, the deadliest mass shooting of any kind in modern American history. 32 people were killed and 17 wounded, in addition to Seung-Hui himself. The response to the shooting revealed catastrophic failures in multiple systems. The university was criticized for failing to adequately warn the campus community between the initial residence hall shootings and the Norris Hall massacre, a delay of approximately 2 hours during which classes continued normally. The mental health system was criticized for failing to effectively treat Seung-Hui despite numerous warning signs and his actual involuntary commitment. The firearms background check system was criticized for failing to capture his mental health history, allowing him to legally purchase weapons despite his documented dangerousness. The subsequent investigation, conducted by an independent panel led by former Homeland Security Secretary Tom Ridge, documented these failures in extensive detail and made numerous recommendations for reform. Many of these recommendations were implemented, including improved emergency notification systems for universities, enhanced information sharing between mental health and legal systems, and increased funding for campus security. However, fundamental tensions between civil liberties and public safety in mental health treatment and firearms access remained unresolved. Because Seung-Hui Cho died by suicide, no criminal proceedings occurred. His family, devastated by the revelation of his crimes, issued a public statement of apology and retreated from public view. His sister, Seung-Kyung Cho, a Princeton graduate and State Department employee, resigned her position and has maintained complete privacy. The Virginia Tech massacre has been extensively studied as a case study in the limitations of threat assessment and intervention, with particular attention to the challenges posed by individuals who do not meet criteria for involuntary commitment but clearly present serious risk. It remains the deadliest school shooting in American history, though subsequent attacks have approached its death toll. The Norris Hall building was closed for extensive renovation and eventually reopened as the home of the university's language and literature programs, including the English department where Seung-Hui had been a student. Annual commemorations continue, and the shooting has become a reference point in ongoing debates about gun control, mental health treatment, and campus security that continue to shape American society.